Have a panel discussion about the FBC Discipleship Pathway. This wraps up the series that we've been talking through this pathway, and the last week of this pathway series, we told you we were going to have a panel discussion. We didn't have a whole lot of questions in the question box, so some of them I made up, and some of them there were some questions there, so we put them in there, and hopefully we can bring some clarity this morning to you. I'm reminded, just recently I had read in my D group, we're doing Bible, we have Bible reading plan, and we're in the book of Nehemiah. And I'm always struck by Nehemiah. You know, the main point of Nehemiah is not focused on Nehemiah and his leadership skills. I understand that, but boy, when you look at how Nehemiah led, there's some really credible thoughts on leadership when it comes to the book of Nehemiah. Let me read a passage out of Nehemiah chapter 2 as we kind of kick off the discussion panel this morning. Nehemiah chapter 2. Starting in verse 11, it says, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. And before I go any further with that, remember, in the context, Nehemiah, God had placed on his heart to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And he was in the service of King Artaxerxes, and he was a cupbearer to the king. And the king actually let him go and do this. And so he is actually in Jerusalem in chapter 2, and he's walking around, he's inspecting the walls. He says, by night I went out through the valley gate towards the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. And I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, and there was not enough room for my mount to get through, which should give you an indication of how destroyed this wall is. And then verse 15, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as of yet, I had not said, I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble that we're in. There's a need. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. There's a plan. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me, and they replied, let us start rebuilding. And so they began this good work. And this is just a snippet out of Nehemiah chapter 2. But Nehemiah, he mobilized a group of people. He was clear about what the objective was, what they were going to do, and they ended up building the walls around Jerusalem in 52 days, in spite of conflict from the outside coming in. I mean, the nations around them were not so happy, right? And they were trying to thwart this objective. And there was also discontentment within. There was oppression happening within the Jewish community that Nehemiah had to deal with. In all of that, they built the walls in 52 days. That's pretty amazing. It's an unbelievable blueprint of leadership, and part of that is the clarity of what God has placed in Nehemiah's heart. He was able to communicate that to the people. This is why we're doing this, by the way. We spent 5 weeks unwrapping the discipleship pathway for everybody, every part of that, and in showing you where in the scriptures the model that we're using, and how it was based in Jesus' interaction with the 72, the 12, and the 3, and the crowds. And so now we're just going to answer questions. I'm going to start by answering the first question, and nobody actually wrote this question out. I wrote this question out because I've heard it in conversation. How does the FBC discipleship pathway fit with our vision? That's a pretty important question. When we start rolling out language like the discipleship pathway, worship, connect, transform, and reach, and someone says, "Wait a second, I thought our vision was to see Christ-centered, kingdom-focused homes on every block in the local community." That's our vision. How does a pathway fit into that? And so let me just quickly answer that by saying, this is what we want to see happen, our vision. We know that in order for this vision to happen, we need to have moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and husbands and wives that are thriving in their homes spiritually. In other words, if we want to see Christ-centered, kingdom-focused homes on every block in the local community, that means adult discipleship is absolutely imperative. Not to say that student and children aren't imperative. They are. And we're going to partner with mom and dad in the spiritual development of their kids for sure. But the driver is adult discipleship. It doesn't matter if it's a ministry in the church. It's led most of the time, almost exclusively by an adult. When you talk about the home, it's mom and dad that we're saying, you're the driver of faith at home. Well, moms and dads need to be people who are growing in their faith themselves. Adult discipleship is huge. And so when we talk about how to get to that vision, the pathway is a piece to that. It's our strategy that we're saying this is how we get to Christ-centered, kingdom-focused homes on every block in the local community. So we need to have growing, thriving adults who love Jesus, who are pursuing Jesus in their lives, who are modeling Jesus and how he functioned. That's how we get to where we're going. So that is question number one. The second question is, this is going to be now more nuts and bolts. Ready? How are life groups formed? How are life groups formed? And I'm going to defer to either one of you, whoever wants to.
I'm going to jump in here a minute and see if I can maybe answer this question a little bit.
Oh, by the way, just for fun, Pastor John Pickens, lead pastor here at First. Some of you are like visiting and going, "Who are these people?" So I'm the lead pastor here at First Baptist. And some of you are in small groups right now and going, man, how are small groups going to be affected by these life groups that are forming? And one of the primary ways that we're starting life groups is taking healthy existing small groups and saying, hey, move your time to Sunday morning. That's the core of that life group. Now let's add some people to it. And of course, again, if you don't like your current small group, you know, if you don't like, I'm talking to the people that are in my small group. You don't like my small group? Fine. All right, go somewhere else. That's fine. I'm just kidding. But I say that sarcastically, by the way. So also, we're gonna look at the next question. We're gonna try to move this along. Why are life groups primarily on Sunday morning? We have existing small groups, but they're happening at different times. My group meets on Sunday evenings. Got a lot of other groups that meet on Sunday evenings, and some that meet other times. And so, why primarily on Sunday mornings?
Well, for people that are in my life stage, childcare is a tough thing. You know, I have a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and a lot of people in our small group have kids around our age. And so then you have to coordinate someone to watch the kids, or you try and coordinate ways to distract the kids so that you can not be distracted. And so one of the great things about having life groups on Sunday mornings during the Sunday school hour is that we already have childcare. We already have great Sunday school programs. And so parents, people with kids can actually really engage easily in the life groups. So that's one advantage of having on Sunday mornings.
Might also jump in and say that on Sunday mornings is logical time maybe for us to meet. It gives us the opportunity. You're already here, so you just flow into the next spot. You know, life groups, and so you don't have to come back. You don't have to make another trip. As you start to age, like I am, you don't like to keep going out over and over again.
You keep calling yourself old.
Well, I am. Getting old. So, as you get up there, you know, you'd rather come on Sunday morning. It's light out. I don't have to fight the dark. And so that's another reason why, you know, we move to Sunday mornings. It also, a lot of times, it's been a challenge for us with small groups to be able to find leaders. Sometimes we would like to have more small groups start, but the challenge has been a little bit too to find leaders who are willing to lead those small groups. By having it on a Sunday morning, it cuts down on the fact that leaders are already here, so it makes them more available, more accessible, and sometimes more willing to lead a life group than what they would a small group where it meets at a different time, and so they have to carve out another time out of a busy schedule to do that.
And also, as we were as we were assessing why some of the small groups, a lot of the small groups were struggling, we found some consistencies. One of those consistent constraints was consistency issues. Not meeting every week, or my group meets every other week, but we consistently meet every other week. Some groups would try to schedule around everybody, and that's almost impossible to do. And what happened is we became these consistency issues. If a small group wasn't meeting, you know, that 2 months before the last time they met together, you can't foster and develop the type of relationships that we want to happen in these groups with that kind of inconsistency. So bringing it Sunday morning solves some leader issues. We don't have enough leaders for small groups. Someone would come to me and say, Pastor, I want to get plugged into a small group. And I'm going, that's awesome. I don't know where to put you. Because I don't know, these healthy groups over here are full. They can't expand anymore, not ready to expand. And we just don't have enough leaders for small groups. And so it solves a variety of issues, constraints that we have identified. That's why one of the reasons we're
I think another one is we want, so the life groups are also going to have at least quarterly time for community outside of Sunday mornings, and then also a time to do some service together. And so if you have the meeting outside of a Sunday morning, it becomes really hard to have an additional time to get together to do things like that. So having the life groups on Sunday morning then also gives you a little more freedom to have some other extra times to get together throughout the year. And then also, which we'll talk about in a little bit, D groups, which we believe will be a really important part of the model moving forward. If you're meeting outside of Sunday mornings, then you're having to meet twice, which can be difficult. So, which we'll get to that later. But so having that time on Sunday mornings will also free some more time for D groups to happen throughout the week.
Yeah, we know that the more that we program regular times outside of these time slots, the more time slots we program, the less likely certain things are going to happen that we want to see happen. And let's go on to the next question. It's how will the church guard life groups from becoming cliques? So a word that's used quite often. How do you guard groups from becoming cliques? And I have opinions on all of these, obviously. But I'm going to defer.
Well, excuse me. When I think about this question, I have to go back to the book of Acts, and I think about how fast the church was growing back then, and they came to the temple, whatever, and they worshiped together. But then, where did they go to these smaller groups? They went into homes, they went outside, and I think about how fast they were growing, and the fact that they couldn't have been together as a group very long, because it says how fast they were growing. And so if our goal then too is to continue to grow, I'm thinking then you're probably not going to be together too long in a life group before you're going to expand into another one. So you're going to birth another one, and that's our goal, is to birth new ones and to not stay together too long. We want to be able to build some relationships, but at the same time, keep in mind that's not our end goal. Our end goal is to actually expand and to grow our life groups, to grow our church.
I think the word clique is kind of a catch-22, because here's the reality. We need close, intimate relationships, and so sometimes we have fear that if people develop close relationships, then other people will be excluded. But the reality is that a lot of what's driving this is a lot of people in the church feel very welcomed on Sunday, but don't feel like they have deep connection with a few other people. So we want to pursue that, but to guard against that, life groups are open groups, so that you have a visitor and you can plug them in right away. So we want to foster those deep, intimate relationships, and that's one of the key factors of the D groups. But we also want to have that opening, so people, when they come in, they can join a group and know they can be part of a community and feel loved, valued, and accepted. So it's one of those things. We want to pursue close relationships, but we still want to have that openness where people can come in.
Yeah. And by the word clique, if someone says clique, meaning that there's a bunch of people, they hang out together, they enjoy hanging out together, they have this relational connection, that's a clique, then I would say, yes, we need cliques, all right? If by the word clique you mean that they exclude other people in that process, then I say, no, we don't need cliques, all right? So that the point of the life groups are that they are open, and we are continuing to foster those relationships, and we want to make those connections. We all know that there are certain people relationally that we connect with more than other people, and so we're going to find those connections and let you thrive in those relationships. And these life groups, I mean, it's not like they're going to be going on for a month and then they're going to birth a new group. These life groups are going to be there's a process of even birthing that requires some apprenticeship, and so a leader is developing another leader to take a group and birth a new group from it, and so these groups are going to be together for who knows how long. They could be together for a year, but it's what I'm saying is that they're not going to be together for just a couple months and then birth a new group. So if you're thinking time-wise, oh man, I don't want to develop a relationship for a couple months with people, that's what we have with electives right now, and I'll get into that later. So anyway.
But even if a life group bursts another group, let's say you start with 10, and then you grow to 20, you've grown beyond your capacity, then maybe you're taking 10 and 10, so you're still with people from your life group that you've built deep relationships with. You're just intentionally replicating to open the door for another life group.
Yep. Yeah, as a part of a holistic discipleship process. Remember, the Great Commission's driving this imperative to make disciples. How are we doing that? What's the process of that? And are we committed to that? And, of course, we're taking that stand to saying, hey, as a church, we're going to be committed to that, which means that we are going to grow. What about those serving in ministry on Sunday mornings? A question that we tackled early on when we were talking about this process, and it's a legitimate question. Matter of fact, if I was serving during that hour on Sunday mornings, which I will be at times, I would be asking the same question. Is there a life group for them?
Well, I'm going to say yes, that there is. We intend to plug them in to a existing life group, wherever that may be. Now, there's times when they are not going to be able to, of course, attend on a Sunday morning service or a Sunday morning after the service during the life group time, but they're also going to have quarterly, hopefully, and maybe even more often than that, maybe monthly. Each life group will have service projects, as Pastor Phil mentioned, but also just times for social events to get together and build relationships one with another. And those are the opportunities that we want to pull those teachers, pull them in, make sure that they're invited into a life group and they feel that they are a part of that group as well.
Yeah, we're just going to be looking for creative ways to help teachers that make that sacrifice to teach the kids. I'm so thankful for man, my kids love their teachers so much, and they talk about them all the time, and they pray for them, and so we just value what the teachers bring to the table, and so we want to make sure we're looking for creative ways to get them plugged in and get them involved in life groups.
And most importantly, I think, is that when you think about this model, D groups are formed out of life groups, okay? D groups are these 3 to 6 gender-specific, these are the most intimate groups that you're meeting together, purposely walking through life together, reading the scriptures, encouraging each other, keeping each other accountable. We want all our ministry leaders to be a part of something, a part of a D group, and that doesn't happen on Sunday mornings. And so that intimate connection that's missed on a Sunday morning, if you're serving, is you're not losing that. Matter of fact, you're gaining it because we're forming these discipleship groups or D groups. Let me talk a little bit about electives. What about electives? Electives are, if you're not familiar with our church or what we do after the Sunday morning service, we have these things called electives. We let you choose what class to go to. We have 10-week sessions, and it's by topic, and you just kind of go to that class for 10 weeks. We think, in that whole, the electives, we started the electives because we were asking the question, what do people need to know as a disciple of Jesus? Because we think knowledge is important to understand the scriptures. I mean, this is all through the New Testament, right? Study to show yourself approved, a good Awana verse, right? But what we found out with electives, our experience has borne out the fact that they're great for helping people to choose and get information, but we were losing connection. Relationships were not being fostered. There was a lot of people not getting connected. Some of you thrive that way. Some of you you really like bouncing around other people because you're relational, intensely relational, and you're aggressive. Not aggressive is probably the wrong word. And you take initiative is what I mean by that. But most people aren't like that, and so we're going to actually do electives. We're not abandoning the idea of electives. We just think that there's some creative ways to give a platform for these classes, whether it be online or we're actually in conversation with another church who's asking the same thing about electives and doing something creative with another church who does have seminary professors and things like that really are knowledgeable in certain subjects that we can even leverage to encourage one another at certain times, but nothing that's regularly programmed.
Yeah, and we have the Right Now Media Ministry. If you haven't gained access to that yet, you can just email one of the staff members. But it's basically like a Netflix for Bible study, and there's tons of teaching on a variety of topics. It's great stuff that you can access at your own time, and it's fantastic. I encourage you, if you haven't done that yet, to email one of us. We'll add you to that so you can have access to that.
So D groups are 3 to 6 people, gender specific, and they are closed groups that meet for 12 to 18 months. You covenant together to meet for 12 to 18 months, and because it's gender specific and because it's a closed group and it's small, you can be creative on the times that you meet. My D group happens to meet on Tuesdays at 9 o'clock because it works for us. Some D groups could meet in the morning for breakfast one of the days, or at lunchtime, or in the evening, or you can be creative in how these D groups meet, but that's what a D group is. How is that different than a fit club? How are D groups different than fit clubs? Fit clubs are language that was being used about 5 years ago when I came here. Don Green had started these fit clubs. And fit clubs and D groups are very, very similar, except for D groups have a specific structure that's a little bit different than the fit club structure. D groups have a reading plan. Matter of fact, what drives a D group is always Bible reading. Your times together in a D group is all about the Word. It's not about discipleship material. It's word-centered, not discipleship material-centered. We're not saying discipleship material is bad. It's just that's in addition to, not in replace of, actually getting into the Word and sharing your Hear journals and whatnot. So there's a specific structure for a D group. That's what makes them very different than a fit club in structure. Ultimately, a fit club was about accountability and about people encouraging one another, gender specific, encouraging one another. They're very, very similar, but D groups have a certain structure to them that we will communicate even more. I mean, I have literature that I've developed for D groups in our church. If you're interested in something like that, I can give you that. But I don't want to get into the structure of a D group yet because we're not really going to launch them right away. And there's a reason that we're not going to launch them right away, if any of you want to answer that question.
Well, so that's the next kind of leads in maybe to the next question, when will D groups officially start? So there are, as the pastor mentioned, there are a few of them that are actually out there and actually have started. So to say, well, we're not starting any D groups, or that's, I guess, not really true. We are starting some D groups, but that's not going to be the focus of our D groups probably for another year. The reason for that partly is because we want to focus on the life groups. We want to make sure that they are up, that they are running well. Once those are running well, your life groups will then, I should say it the other way around, your D groups are a result of your life groups. So life groups break down into a smaller group. So you've started to build some relationships in your life group of, 10 to 20 people or whatever. There's a few that you're probably going to become more closer to. And so out of that, we feel that probably D groups are going to develop from that. You'll have a smaller group of people. Those are same, how do I say it? Same sex?
Same gender, yeah.
Same
or
gender, there you go.
Whatever you, yeah.
So that's the way those are usually formed, and just a smaller group of 3 to 5 people. So.
Yeah, and to launch all of these elements at one time would be, we want to make sure we launch the life groups really well. We want to make sure that they're very successful. And then also people that will be leading D groups, we want them to have a chance to experience D groups as well. So we'll have a chance to have kind of some first generation D group leaders who are able to participate in D groups, so that when we do launch D groups, they'll have experienced it and know what to do and know how to lead too.
Yeah, and D groups have, one of the reasons they have a specific structure to them is because we want things to be reproducible, right? If we want this to reproduce, it's got to have a standard structure. There's some flexibility within that structure, but it's got to have structure to it. In other words, if we just say, yeah, go off and do whatever you want to do, okay? we really couldn't stop you from doing that, okay? But that's not what we want, because then it's not reproducible. How do you reproduce that in other groups that are forming? So we want people who are leading D groups to go through a D group and experience a D group first. And the idea is they're going to lead a D group, and then those other 3 to 5 people or 2 to 5 people are going to be challenged at the end of that time to prayerfully consider who they can invite into a D group sometime in the near future, so that they're replicating, so that they're reproducing, so that we're actually making disciples who what? Make other disciples. So let me look at my questions here. So the official start, date in our timeline, we're looking at September of 2018 to actually launch D groups officially, although there will be some already started. There's some going on right now. As an older person, how do I fit into this model?
Phil?
Okay. I told you, see? I told you.
Ouch.
So yeah, it's not just the gray hair. Yes, that's not helping any either. But as an older person, how do I fit into this model? So, I don't think it's any different for an older person than it is for a young person, as far as fitting into a life group, getting involved in a life group on Sunday morning. We hope that the older people would want to be in life groups so that they could build those same relationships, but also so that they can learn from the young people, like I said a few minutes ago. So we want everybody to be included, whether you're young, just out of high school. We've even talked about seniors in high school. Maybe they would even move into life groups before they even get out of high school to start to integrate that process. So the younger people grow up and knowing what a life group is and learn what that is. So we're considering that as well. We're not sure. We've had discussions and stuff with Christy. How do life groups fit down even into the children's groups? How can we integrate that? One thing that I just want to point out here from an older person is that how do you instill what kids are learning at church, and how do you instill that in your home? Okay, so what we're trying to do is you have the next steps, Sunday morning sermon, and so we also have what we want to try to do is formulate so that the kids are learning the same thing you are, so that on your ride home you can say, "What'd you learn in church today?" And they can give you maybe what they learned. Sometimes, I don't know if you ever get the response, "Nothing." It's like, so you spent an hour
Never
at
get
church
that.
and you learned nothing, right? So, but if you're learning the same thing as an adult, then you can help to cement that in the home. On the ride home, you talk about those, you have questions, your children have questions, you can help to answer those because you've learned the same thing in a life group. So
I think there's so much, for those of you that are older, you have so much wisdom to offer to young punks like me. And but no, there's just so much wisdom that comes with experience and with age, and we want that those intergeneral relationships. And thinking of like a college student in a life group with someone who's 75 who can love them, and I know some of our old people make amazing cookies, things like that, And my cookies are just the ones you buy that you just set on they're not that good. So there's so much experience and wisdom that comes with age, and so to have those intergeneral relationships in a life group is so valuable.
Yeah, and the church that we're, or the pastor that has kind of led this charge of this particular model, his name is Robbie Gallaty, and he, in his church, Phil and I went to a blueprint, and he was even talking, he showed a video, and I couldn't get my hands on this video. I was trying to this week, but he was talking about this older gentleman in his church, 70s, and he'd never really made disciples before, and he was really kind of nervous about it, not even nervous about it, like going, how in the world am I going to do that, you know? And he showed the video, a testimony of this guy who is on his second or third generation of disciples that he has made. Generation meaning he's gone through one D group, he started a new D group, and he started a new D group. 3 years. Where he's investing in people. And this is a gentleman in his 70s and never really made disciples before. He just was just part of a church program, involved in ministry, but not really investing in people's lives. And he did that at 70. So the encouragement to that is that no matter where you're at right now, I'm under the belief that God's just not done with you yet. And there's some creative ways that you can invest in people's lives for His glory and for the sake of the gospel. And so I think that's pretty cool. So that is all the canned questions. Like I said, we didn't get a whole lot of questions, but those are the questions we're going to answer today. If you have more questions, you can see myself, Phil, probably a couple other Phils around here you can ask too. But there's quite a few people that have been involved. I mean, I would even encourage you to talk to Christy. Hey, Christy, what's children's ministry kind of look like? And she can kind of give you an idea of some of the things that she's thinking. I'm putting her on the spot. Sorry, Christy. She's like, oh no, now I got to think about it. Actually, she has been thinking about it and bouncing some things off of me, and I think it's pretty fantastic. Actually, some of the things that she's thinking through. So, anyway, that's I know this is kind of a different Sunday morning service. I'm not really preaching a passage, but we thought it was absolutely important for you to have some clarity about this direction that we're headed with the pathway. It's going to affect adult ministry, it's going to affect student ministry, it's going to affect children's ministry, and the long story short, it's going to affect our programming too. We want to simplify. We want to use the model as a way to align ministries. And we don't want to do something just for the sake of doing it. We want it to align with how we're functioning in ministry. So this is a big deal. This is a big deal. So let's pray, and we're going to sing, and we'll be done for today. Father, thank you so much just for the opportunity that we have to gather together, and thank you for these men up here with me who have been a part of this process for about a year now, reading through Simple Church, diving into discipleship and the nuts and bolts of it, even going to conferences. And Father, I thank you so much for how you have led us even to adopt the FBC discipleship pathway. Father, your hand has been so evident to us as leaders, and some of the things that have happened along the way that have been affirmation after affirmation of your doing. God, I thank you so much for that, and I thank you for the opportunity that we have this morning to bring some clarity perhaps to some of the questions that people have had from the series that we were just in. God, you are good to us. We pray that more than anything that you would help us and empower us to be a church that makes disciples who makes other disciples so that we could see Christ-centered, kingdom-focused homes on every block in the local community. In Jesus' name, amen.